Today we are playing Guilty Gear once again, and you're probably going to see a lot of matches between these two characters, as we don't have a whole lot of other people lined up to join. We are, as always, loser stays on lobby. US East Coast. You can find the information of how to join in our tweet at 2_MK_FGC. This will be repeated, of course, later in the stream, but generally, even if you're reviewing this on YouTube later, that's how you generally join Tuesday Trade, so now you know. Rabbit has been pushing himself against the players at the local quite a lot relatively. So I have a lot of catching up to do. However, you can definitely see that one of the flows that is relatively easier to use for Jam, as she is that type of character, is to just use the meter to push the opponent off. She has a lot of really good combos and a lot of really good cancels she can use. But she also does so much damage in neutral that if she can beat you in neutral, getting you off of her during pressure, depending on the confidence of the player, leads directly into all that damage. A little closer. Being predictable with certain characters in this game is just painful for you as the player, because there's no way to get a real advantage if your opponent is always thinking they don't get the Jam is definitely one of those characters, at least for some players. Most of her strength comes from being able to overwhelm the opponent mentally. Of course, you do have to be careful not to overwhelm yourself. Really, the reason this character works for me is that it's generally hard to overwhelm myself mentally. However, it is relatively easy to overwhelm myself executionally. She's a step above, for example, playing Seth in Eunice, who just gels at almost the exact correct level. Losing in Guilty Gear can often feel like, oh, I pressed something and it didn't do what I expected because not keeping up with the executional requirement. In Eunice, when I lose, which is often, it's usually just because something specific that the opponent knows happens. That sort of thing you just saw is exactly what I'm referring to. Understanding whether or not Jam is going to hit you with an attack can actually be an exercise in frustration for a lot of players. Is this attack going to hit me? Is it intended to hit me? This also means that she is one of the characters with the longest and strongest ability for certain types of mix-up. Specifically the mix-up that comes when you stop doing your attacks to get something else. Stressing the opponent into thinking one thing is going to happen and then something else happening is a common theme for characters of the type that I play, for example. But it's not something you easily see as something that helps you out, unless you have a certain type of mindset to go with it. Because she's so fast, and because she has moves that have so little relative recovery, or rather, by the time you determine which one she did and which height she did it at, because that's often what changes the properties, you may not be able to figure out how to respond to it. You have to train really hard for really long to have every response ready for this character. Particularly when the player is playing relatively crazy and not just trying to get a specific thing. This allows me to play in a relatively free-form manner, but I honestly don't know whether or not that would ever last. It does move okay at tournaments because I don't tend to die in neutral as far as I can find. But I'm not sure yet. This also happens because if you're the player that drops a combo, especially if you drop it partially on purpose, you are the one that knows the situation is about to happen. It is in this way that Oni Rabbit ends up training, something that isn't very helpful at the local actually. The local near here is generally players who have very specific techniques and very specific ideas of how to play certain things. Meaning that it's more about learning the specifics of does this work or does this not work. Predicting your opponent's movement isn't always as necessary as you'd think if you find yourself able to put yourself in spaces where your moves are likely to either be confusing or change their properties in some way. This is a style we see often on the side of Europe. Even in Street Fighter, there is some change you get when people decide, I'm bringing out my crazy stuff. In our experience, on the American side, bringing out my crazy stuff means, I bet you've never seen this mix-up. On that side, it's usually, I bet you've never seen what happens when I do this move at this spacing, followed by this other move. They lead to different types of learning. Different pieces of information come across to the player in turns. My own natural randomness also plays into this. If you don't know what I'm going to do because I don't know what I'm going to do, then nothing you think of can actually work. This does mean that proper offense is a better response than defending. But that will only last you long enough for you to build up a skill set. And this is often true for players. Players who use this style of play where they are true random need to build up skills of a particular type while they're playing. In my case, unfortunately, accelerating too much means that combos become charges. In this case, the aim is not to overwhelm with offense, or to have rock-solid defense, or even strong mix-ups. You could say the goal is just to overwhelm entirely. That interaction, for example. If you've seen jam combos lots of times, you know what they're supposed to look like. but what actually happens is not necessarily what you see. In fact, most of this match is entirely, are you currently overwhelmed or not? Since I have no advantage when on Rabbit is not. The difference in both our levels of practice and our intents in matches like these mean that there's just no way. If I'm not overwhelming him, there's no way he's going to get opened up by anything I did anyway. Some characters simply don't have this ability. Kai is not really a character that can overwhelm you with this sort of thing because Kai doesn't have any animations that are really short enough. The ones that he does are not generally for moves that are particularly tricky or even have good range. But we all play different characters for different reasons. We learn to notice different smaller things. And of course, to react to smaller situations. Guilty Gear is full of so much of this though that you could play this game for literally years and not see everything a character can do, or even everything a certain player might think of to do. It's crazy. If this frustrates you, and it does frustrate us, some of us, it's not really that this isn't the game for you, but rather that your need to play in tournaments or similar setups might be a little different. Your goal might be more specifically to learn a character for fun and figure out what you can do with that character so you have a better idea of what other people are trying. If that's your style, you might just want to play one person for a really long time and see all of the little things that happen, especially after you've played the character a little bit yourself. Recent information about Guilty Gear Strive from a specific interview/panel has indicated to us something that I was thinking about when I was watching a flow from Faust's trailer. If you're a fan of this game, you're probably used to the idea that the new Guilty Gear is not going to be very deep. People have been complaining about it and talking about it for a while now. My opinion was that there's a specific thing I saw in Faust's trailer that made me think the stuff you all want may be in here, and they've just shown off characters that don't have any reason to do it. If you really think about the characters we've seen so far, it's basically been who? Mei, who can do it, but if you take away one of her moves, she loses the ability overall. We don't know if she still has that move because we've never seen it. Probably she doesn't. Kai, who plays solid but doesn't have a lot of really grimy stuff, and some of his really grimy stuff was taken away as well. Saul, who never really even has it and just relies on good spacing and the fact that he can't counterattack certain things he does. Chip, who should have more of it, but on the other hand, can you actually execute the things Chip's supposed to do? Because a lot of people really cannot. And Potemkin. Interestingly, Potemkin was the one where we saw the longest combos, and where we saw a lot of minor potential, but we always ended up, it's easy to end up thinking, well, of course they had to give it to Potemkin, because otherwise he'd have nothing. But then we got to Faust, and Faust did a couple of little tiny things, mostly involving hitting punch to juggle people, and specific spacings that he used to get combos, that gave the impression, wait, maybe it is in here. We don't generally see the characters who do this so far. We've seen one who sometimes sort of does it, and his trailer, while it doesn't show a lot of terrifying Faust stuff, we do see some things that indicate, this might be still a thing. One part of the reason for this is that if you take out the quote-unquote grimier stuff in the game, things that generally pin down the opponent, or force them to face what we call a true mix-up. You can't know. You can't outthink it, you can't outplay it, your opponent eventually gets full control of the scenario and you don't get to do anything. The game has a lot of those. Quite a few of them are solved by having meter, but one of the flaws in Guilty Gear's standard playstyle was that if you didn't have meter for long enough, you would literally get deleted from the beginning of the round if it happened to happen. Obviously the answer to that is, hey, just burst. But no. Because the more mechanics you put into a game that your player must rely on to get themselves out of situations that they don't even understand, the less accessible your game is overall. It's not necessarily more deep because all that actually happens is that the player gets told by someone, oh yeah, here's how you solve that. But it's not super engaging to be just told, here's this other thing you would never have thought of or didn't know existed, this is how you solve this problem you're having. So, we can't be sure yet. If their intent was to take out the you don't get to move for 10 seconds and once you get to move, it's under my terms, if they took out all of those aspects, it's entirely possible that the game is now, even if not necessarily more focused on neutral, the other components of it that actually result in other types of depth, because that is a type of depth, but not one everyone enjoys. If that's the only type of depth that has been removed, many of us will still be able to enjoy it. What may happen is that top-level play will look a bit more normal though. We've had that quote-unquote problem with games recently, with top-level play looking relatively homogenized since many players understand what's going on. But whether or not that's good or bad is kind of subjective, because why would you want to watch a game that you didn't understand what was going on? And if you had to play the game for thousands of hours just to understand whether or not something was happening, you might not be so inclined to watch it, since you already put all that time to do that. However, it is definitely true that certain types of depth are easily removed in terms of long-term longevity of the game when everything can be figured out. And that's one of the things you still see in mix-ups of certain types. If your opponent can understand everything you're doing, then there must be some point at which they become unable to react to it, or you're just going to lose. Let's demonstrate that in this matchup. If I only do things that are understandable, then Jam must overwhelm Leo with basic damage. But, as demonstrated, you can literally hit her out of max region. This is not a specifically hard thing to do for someone who has the ability to listen, predict, feel things once they start to happen. So, Cosmic Wolf, Space Wolf can play from this pacing fairly easily. And he's not really easy to trick. If anything, I'd have to abuse the fact that he doesn't always react to the fact that he's dropped out of a combo. But if you, for example, know how to react to that move, you're not really going to ever be in serious danger. Anti-airing jam is not super hard either. Not that range. But you see at the end I switched to using slightly different things. Specifically, moves that allow Jam to mask her intention. She's moving forward, she's doing the Bakushu dash, but she has 4 enders to this, and you can't necessarily beat all of those enders in the same way, prompting you to either take an action to move past her, which is something Leo can do, but the game tends to stay in neutral for a very long time if both players keep on spamming that sort of thing. Or you hope you have the correct defense. Move into the good position for the punish if she does a particular one. If it was a matter of me as a player attempting to set up something to trick, then that might be effective, but as I'm being completely random most of the time, it's more likely to be frustrating. Unless you are literally good at guessing in neutral, that style of play is going to frustrate you if you feel as if you must depend on it. What is my opponent doing? They seem to have no game plan. They do different things every time. That one didn't even make any sense. It mostly comes down to how much one cares about taking certain types of damage. And that is why, as I said, I don't expect this style of play to work too well at higher levels. The opponent is able to do too much damage. That part I don't expect to have changed in Stride in any way. If you do crazy things, and your opponent reads you correctly, or even sometimes you just did too crazy a thing and they defended, I expect big damage to be the result. Even though they have specifically said that the damage numbers we're seeing in the demos are more so for demos, I wouldn't expect them to take it down to more than 75%. My theory actually is that they just don't have the proration in on a lot of things, specifically that you can start a combo with anything. And they just don't scale certain things at all. We'll see though. All we know is that they've definitely implied, okay, these are not the actual damage numbers in the game. You're going to see real damage at some point, possibly later in the year, but when exactly that will be, we don't know.
いい勝負でした。勝利大勝。すごいな。現役時よりもむしろ腕を上げているじゃないか。あの時の私ならきっと今の君には勝てないだろう。え？何をつぶやいているんだ。また辞書に何か書いているな。
However, for some people, the ability to do that is an important part of the game for them. And as a player who plays this sort of thing, I absolutely understand it. Without being able to dash through or frustrate people in specific ways, the game itself has to be different. You have to be able to play deceptive footsies, which is much harder, but I still like it. Either way, the result is a game that does not feel as fluid to people who need to be random because there's not enough random to be. Jam, for example, is a character who can manipulate her movement a lot, but honestly, once you're used to it, she doesn't have a whole lot of unexpected options. Part of the reason why she's often played as a pressure character is similar to why Chip is. If you know that you are just going to block everything, Jam doesn't really have a lot of things she will do that will actually bother you. She gets to hit buttons forever, but that doesn't mean you're going to get anything out of it. So it takes a certain type of person to be satisfied just hitting buttons that get blocked indefinitely. Especially when the payoff is so low when you do take the damage. Against Leo, this is important because you have to spend so much time taking actions that don't actually give you anything. He has good range, he has good stops, he has good ways of dealing with her once he's in his positions. And you have to do a lot of stuff like that. A lot of the times where you have the instinct to attack, you simply have to do nothing. Wait for Leo to do something to attempt to prevent you, and then we'll punish that. Which means that this match actually ends up being relatively relaxed for Jam when she's on offense because she's not specifically trying to do anything. The rest is a matter of reading timings. One good example of this is the fact that, as we know from watching him play other games, Cosmic Wolf will generally do one thing until it stops working. For someone who is random, that means that eventually, basically stop clock right twice a day. If I randomly choose not to attack, then I don't get hurt, and if I randomly choose to attack, I do get hurt. But this is specifically because you can't overwhelm a person who just intends to do the same thing every time. And depending on the way that you as a player think, this is just valid. You just have the exact same reaction every time because you know your opponent is going to try to be random. It means that if they have two options, you will win half the time. You are not more or less likely to win by trying to guess. It's like those people who decide, okay, no matter what, every time there's a coin flip ever, I am going to pick heads. In fighting games, this doesn't generally work as a strategy for most characters because you take a lot more damage for picking certain things than others. But Leo is a good example of a space where this doesn't necessarily hold true. Kai is not in that situation. Kai can't necessarily go, I'm going to greed sever every time no matter what, because if your opponent picks up on it, they'll go to the point of, oh, I basically deleted you now. Did it one time too many, and I was set up and expecting it to happen and have a ton of meter to do things with, so therefore you die. That's a decent explanation of overwhelming there. It's easy to assume that once Jam builds up max level region, that the player's aim is going to be to land this hit or to set up a situation where they do. But if they're confident enough in the other aspects of the game, just sitting on it and using it when the time comes is more of a subtraction from Jam's playstyle than an addition. Specifically, you go, okay, well, now since I'm at max region, I can't use it until it's the right time. Therefore, I now have to play without region. It's a good way to read whether or not your opponent is trying to do specific things, honestly. On this character type, that is. But as noted, and Omni Rabbit knows this very well, if the answer is simply do nothing, it works out pretty well. Even positioning herself to get throws is difficult, and actually doing the throws against an aware enough opponent is even more difficult. To get the next level of this, you must therefore do a different type of pressure, or a different type of mental pressure, that is. If your opponent is going to have the same reaction to a specific situation every time, what you need to remove from them is not the reaction, but the consciousness of the decision to do it. In other words, my aim here is not to prevent Leo from countering most of the things Jan does, but actually to take advantage of the fact that this is the default and force the default at timings I want it to happen. This does not teach lower level players anything other than the fact that they can do it by certain things. But you can see here, if I were to just do Bakushu Dash all of the time, eventually he would just react. But to add other things into it, to make the rest of the game feel as if it's the normal thing, that it must be played in the normal way, and then include the dash at timings where I'm ready to do something, helps out a lot. You can also make your opponent somewhat nervous this way, but this doesn't really work on Cosmic.
私は金の奴隷ね。でもそれ以上に美意識の奴隷ね。たとえ相手が王様であっても、お前の顔面はNGよ。
We have been discussing this concept quite a bit in recent streams, overwhelming the opponent with some method we have. But the thing to understand is that this isn't about outsmarting people per se. It is literally that there is a threshold level that certain players have that is literally, I can no longer prevent myself from doing the automatic thing. In Street Fighter, we specifically have an entire bot to help you train dealing with this. Our Nash bot's entire purpose is to make you able to do things other than your default in situations where it doesn't seem right. And this is one of the things that's probably going to come up in Strive a lot. Since the lack of grimy stuff, as we call it, means that there's a lot more you have to deal with. So far from our looks at Grand Blue, interestingly, it has more of that, except with less overall game depth, which it's really hard to say how that's going to be received by any community, really. The game lets you do what we often hear referred to as degenerate things, but they're still mostly fair. It fits the model that a lot of people have been wanting from fighting games in. Less pure balance, less homogenization, but at the same time, it doesn't give a lot of crazy mechanics you have to learn. It's basically down to just the character. It's definitely going to be an interesting way of doing it, but it will probably not require the same things that Strive does. It's more likely that Guilty Gear Strive is going to be a lot about pushing on that level of quicker realm. It's often a thing that makes the game feel a bit better, depending on the type of player you are. Some people get really, really discouraged by it. Others mostly just do fine. The idea that a high-level player has beaten you not because you don't know how to stop the thing that they're doing, but simply that you have been pushed to your limit and they're literally moving faster or thinking faster than you can deal with. It's a lot better a simulation of, to some extent, real martial arts, and definitely in other ways, the sort of thing we're used to in most shonen anime these days. Your opponent is just flatly superior. You can't keep up with them. Particular types of grimy stuff actually remove this requirement, because you don't need to overwhelm the opposing player. You just get to a position where they must make a guess. And you can do this from a physical level. Your physical skill gets you to the point where your opponent is in a 50-50, a real one that they have to make a decision, and all you have to do is either confirm once you've actually landed the combo, or not. One good example that you see in Jam and was popular back in Darkstalker's days is the fact that Jam can actually do an entire normal in the air and do another one before she lands. Depending on your level of focus, you can't stop this. You can anti-air it, but if you were focused on the ground game, your problems get even more complicated. This is something that happens a lot to other Wolf actually. Because the ability to correctly listen to situations does not necessarily grant you the ability to deal with those sorts of things. And a defensive playstyle gives your opponent time to activate that ability of theirs, to push you to the point where their speed or their intent has overwhelmed your ability to react or do anything. Fortunately, Leo has really good buttons for dealing with this. This is not a matter of Leo not being able to react to Jam doing this dash. It is simply that the player has no way to make sure that that's the correct thing to do. Forcing them into playing a specific style. There you go. For example, you see, it is reactable. That's not really the problem. If I just keep doing it, you'll react. The goal, therefore, is not to do that, but to overcome the defense of the opponent by making them think they need to play other forms of defense.
私は金の奴隷ね。でもそれ以上に美意識の奴隷ね。たとえ相手が王様であっても、お前の顔面は NG よ。
Looks like for tonight we're going for another 90 minutes. Probably. Slayer is another character where you often need this ability. Because he's like Jam, but he has even less really tricky things. He does have more buttons he can hit that leave him completely safe after them. But this does not really change the situation. When the opponent's defense is nearly perfect, Slayer can feel like a terrible uphill struggle. Especially if you're the type that doesn't want to just hit the same button over and over and always constantly space yourself back to perfect range. He absolutely can do that in this matchup. Spend the entire match moving to the exact correct range, hitting the exact correct button, waiting for Leo to block it over and over and over. Because when Leo does crazy things to stop those buttons or beat them out, the timing matters. If Slayer hasn't hit the button yet, he blocks, Leo gets damaged, you punish. It's generally advantageous to Slayer. But if you lose the life lead, if Leo does make a really particularly good read and does a massive amount of damage, or if you're just not fast enough when Leo decides to switch to offense, you don't really get to do much of anything. And this is one of the matchups where Slayer has more trouble building a meter. Faith in Weir's ability to overwhelm the opponent's concept of how the game should be played, even from neutral, is important for matchups like this. This is more so a player matchup than a character matchup. Slayer has so many straightforward options that it's difficult to tell, meaning that he really still has to rely at least partially on that part of it. In other words, both things are needed. Slayer must be able to get to the correct spacing, hit the button that he expects Leo to block, and then from there, while he's doing that, be thinking about the correct method for getting in otherwise. If Leo did go for a big read, what would be the correct thing to do? You are seeing some of that here now. Thunder's goal is to get to the right spot, hit buttons at that spot. Leo shouldn't really respond too much to those buttons. But eventually, just do this, blitz, dash. Sometimes use Slayer's super. Dash up and do his man grab. Those sorts of things. But to focus on both the tiny bits of this is the exact spacing I need to stand at, and at this spacing, not only have you just reached it, not only have you recognized that your opponent is vulnerable because they haven't moved yet, and then know which button to hit, to decide I'm not hitting that button because I want to open my opponent up rather than be blocked. What should I do instead? This is also something that comes up in the Kai matchup for Slayer, but the main issue is he has more active time from Kai's side. Kai hits more buttons than Leo does on defense. Understanding which buttons will push you out of Kai's range, and therefore letting Kai finish his streak, is also important. Therefore, Slayer's goal is less to hit buttons that put Kai at a place that he wants, but rather to stand at a spot where Kai's buttons push Slayer to the spot he wants to. And to do all this, he must discourage Kai from actually moving and get him to just hit buttons. Overall, a very complicated solution. Blitz does help though. Unlike Leo where it tends to get into problems, Slayer can blitz a lot in this matchup if that's his goal. But that's a good example. Against certain types of characters, the thing Slayer should do once he's reached a certain spot is hit another button so that he gets that max range, force them to lock or get a hit. Against Kai, he often wants to hit his button, realize, oh, I'm at a good spacing here for blocking, so I'm blocking. This is also what unlocks his ability to actually dash at Kai. And this game ends up being relatively grounded. But as you can see, because Kai genuinely needs to be so active with his buttons to play this game out correctly, Slayer gets to do more things. This is a problem that Omni Rabbit actually has against Slayer players a lot, because the obvious thing to do in a lot of situations is take control of the match by pressing buttons and pushing Slayer away from you where he can't seemingly do much damage. But a good Slayer player is not only waiting for you to do that, they're setting up the entire experience. They're watching what buttons you do hit, and if you tend to do the same thing over and over again, which for Kai really isn't unlikely given that he doesn't have a lot of options, they often get in eventually. And when they do get in, it's usually in a big way. And Slayer can take like 75% of Kai's health when he does this.
Get on to rock! Get up to burn! Stand with the fight and burn for your desire!
Jam's shorter range makes this a little bit easier, but Slayer's reactions to Jam's aerial movement don't lead to any damage from his side, usually. You have to be really ready for a lot of things with Slayer in order to do this, because she can go over his head very easily. The easy answer is to just dash forward whenever you think Jam is going to jump, or whenever you see she has. Jam wants to slow down this match by normally clipping Slayer's legs, because she just doesn't want to have to deal with all that. It's also more likely to cause the Slayer player to hit buttons at a particular spacing that lets her parry. To get advantage in this matchup, therefore, is more so about getting Slayer to stop doing certain things, so Jam can build up enough cards, charges, whatever else, to actually use her other moves to do damage. Basically, just playing this game with normals is not going to work out for her. Since he can do the same thing to her, pushing her to a specific range, she often wants to set up a situation where it's difficult to do that. This is another example of more or less the same situation. Because the situation is so fast, there is a moment where the opponent can be pushed to doing the sensible thing, or even not necessarily the sensible thing, just a thing that would lessen the pressure that they're under mentally. If you can catch that key moment, you can often do completely unexpected things to lead you to victory, simply because there's no way for them to do it at all.
on to rock, get up to burn, stand with the fire, never
気を
feel
固め
no
ろ
desire.
親善試合第一開始
But we're already starting to see that outcome. Player has to spend most of his match practicing this. I need to hit exactly this button at exactly this spacing, or choose to do something else entirely. And the something else entirely is the big way to get damage, but he still has to occasionally hit the button. Otherwise, the opponent will expect the other thing all of the time. As your opponent becomes more and more defensive, you need to spend more and more time hitting the button and not going for the crazy thing as well. Which can be a really stressful experience to have, because you really want to open them up, that's the game you are aiming to play. But as they spend more and more time baiting you into doing the big thing that will get them opened up, you get to do it less and less, obviously. Depending on how much damage you take for doing it, it becomes more and more stressful because it becomes frustrating. You want to open them up, but every time you do, something bad happens. But being patient and constantly moving to the same spot can be a little boring for some people. One good thing to note is that for most players, if they are in the mindset of aiming to bait you into doing something that you think will open them up, they are not, absolutely not going to stop you from getting to the perfect space you want to hit those buttons. One good example there is, in this matchup, it's really important for Suntier specifically to not react to being hit by certain things. Leo throwing a relatively weaker form of his projectile and hitting Slayer in neutral is not a lot of damage, and depending on your scenario, really not that big a deal. This is one of the things that easily discourages beginner players, not necessarily realizing that even though they're getting hit, the thing their opponent is using to prevent themselves from having to think too hard or do additional things isn't really hurting that much.
ダンディズム？待て、説明は不要だ。すでに辞書には記してある。何々？なるほど。なかなかに深い歴史があるようだが、長すぎる。俺の名前で上書きしよう。
Get on to rock, get up to burn, stand with the fire, never feel no desire.
But fortunately for today, as with all our streams of this type, the entire reason for Loser Stays On is that unless you're being completely overwhelmed by the number of people in the lounge, you'll end up with very specific targeted things to focus on. At this point, therefore, Suntier has three things. One character against whom he must move into position and hit. One where he has to move into position and block. And one where his goal is to make that character do more things and prevent her from doing air things. A lot of the time, The reason it can feel as if you've gone so far beyond your training partners when you happen to do something is actually because just playing the matchup better in most games increases the strain on your opponent. It doesn't have to be that you are super good at the game. Rather, you need to recognize that sometimes that little bit of playing better is having a much bigger effect than you think. Because you may not actually do more damage, you might just play better a little bit. You might have better spacing a little bit. You might occasionally land more strikes in neutral. But all of those things stress the opponent out the same way that theirs stress you out. Because they don't have the confidence to just go for what they always go for and expect it to work. That sort of thing is what we expect to see a lot of in Strive, particularly with the changes to the Roman cancel system. While we're all kind of confused as to why they made a particular choice relative to it, it is going to be a real thing that you have to deal with. And it's going to be a much stronger system for the defender when you can't use them as if they are EX moves. But to be fair, a lot of them were not really helpful in that way. Strictly, it was just a thing we used to help people understand it. Really, in order to yellow Roman cancel things, you generally don't do the move itself. It's, again, part of overwhelming the opponent, making them think one thing is coming, and then it doesn't. Being them out. For Kai, the answer here is just throw more projectiles, honestly. Mostly because the timing for it causes him to beat out a lot of things Slayer does, and because Slayer tends to play grounded and relatively close, unless the player is hitting so many buttons that Kai ends up getting hit out of the startup of the projectile, there's not a lot of stress to be had. From Slayer's side, the alternate response is to dash through these projectiles, but against Kai particularly, this doesn't really make him strong. He doesn't get to dash through them and then do something. Kai will usually be defending, and if he's not defending, the hit you're going to get is not going to be your best.
Get on to rock, get up to burn, stand with the fight, ever feel your desire.
This match is about patience on Jam's side, because her main goal at any point is to make Slayer not want to fight. Or to slow down the pace of the match enough that he doesn't feel as if he is fighting. And Slayer mostly just wants her to not do certain moves. Specifically those. Meaning that rather than trying to hit Jam, he should do similar things to Kai. Realize that this little girl can't really hit him very hard. And sometimes she can't catch and hit him at all. But she also can't spend a lot of time in neutral, feeling comfortable enough to do power-ups. another good reason for her to go for the dust as much as she does. Because he also has one of the highest coverages for moves that actually prevent her from doing Bakushu Dash, it's not a really strong part of this matchup for most people. It's more of a confirm. You really wouldn't want a move whose entire purpose is to get your opponent confused when that opponent can literally dash through the move. So technically, while that whole sequence probably looked like I was doing dominant things, it doesn't matter to Slayer that much. What mattered was that moment. Fortunately, it worked out, i.e. it got blocked. In this match, for example, I spend more of my time noting and looking for the moment where Slayer and Jam both backdash at the same time, double tap down, and in that timing, confirm the distance. If the distance indicates that it's possible to get a charge, hit the button. If not, guess.
Get up to rock, get up to burn, stand with the fight, ever feel your desire.
お待たせした。俺はなんだ。
清い産業親善試合第一開始。
よっ。軽くいくぞ。
Guilty Gear is so dense and intense that it feels like I've been talking for half an hour and it's been 10 minutes. Either that or my clock has stopped. But no, definitely 10 minutes. We're already seeing a good start to this from Slayer's side. To the same spot, hit the right button. And eventually, there'll be something else you get to do. Such as that dash. Looks like things got a little laggy for a little bit, but that doesn't usually last between these two fields. What's really interesting on this field though one thing that does help Slayer a lot with this is in fact his command grab, but as keeping that move under duress is a bit much. Still, the overall flow you're seeing is still really good. Getting hit by a couple of those projectiles is not necessarily the big deal in the matchup, so sometimes let him happen. Player also has the ability, at least against Leo, to do certain moves at a speed and timing where, if he's at the right range, Leo has very few real responses. He can do certain things, but this player can almost always be ready for those things to the point where you can even confirm that Leo has done them. Similarly to inputting the buffer to a counter move, and then, once again, hitting the button when you see it's been hit. But yeah, definitely looks like there's a lag going on, at least in the connection to here. It was probably not the most enjoyable of matching. People who spend a lot of time playing this, when you hear someone complain the lag is too much, it's because they're trying to read spacings in lag. And that can be enough of a nightmare that some people just are unwilling to put up with. Even a couple of frames of rollback against a faster walk speed character played by someone who plays quite actively makes the entire match devolve into guessing in a way that for some people resembles playing at a lower level, which often has a lot of bad memories to go with it.
明日のようだがオードブルで強直に見えてさじに抜け目ない男だ。押村君はその気骨が私を老夫と判断したことだ。
On that note, fix your win quote font Street Fighter 5. Leo can actually use the projectile game in this matchup a lot. Not necessarily because Kai has no ways over it, but we're going back to the same thing. If you just throw projectiles indefinitely, eventually Kai will read one of them and go over it. But because it's so obvious that you go trying over things when you shouldn't, that you're going to get seriously hurt by one of Leo's attacks, you don't want to do it. And while Leo's stuff is technically reactable by most players, understanding whether or not you're at the range where you will reach him in time is about as hard as doing it against Gil. Since exactly which projectile Leo throws out heavily affects the way you need to do this. Even if you eventually learn to recognize Leo's projectiles on their startup, you would also have to recognize other aspects of the spacing or animation. Allowing him to more or less negate the standard gameplay. And since his projectiles are faster than Kai's, you do get away with a lot of things. If absolutely necessary, Leo can spend his time trying to set up the correct projectile, eventually throwing out the one that will force most Kai players to block. And get some advantage that way. Are we getting slowed down? Are we getting bumped off? Are we getting stopped early? All sorts of things do happen. Usually though, it's just the server freezing up for a little bit before the next match. There's not a whole lot of depth to this matchup once you've gotten past that point though. It's more or less a damage race, and Leo tends to win it, but if Jam has the knockdown timing to prepare a specific response, then he has to be a lot more careful about it. It's not something you'll necessarily see here because again my opponent tends to play a little more defensively, but I'm still going to prepare it in case and try to play it in a way that will lead to happen. With even one charge of your uppercut basically, and the fact that it doesn't really tend to require a lot, you don't need it a lot in this matchup basically. Executing the cross-cut form of it when Leo is getting in on you is difficult. But the good part about it is, if you know what you're doing, you can always use a successful one to charge another one. Jam is also one of the characters who has a basically instant dive kick, which resolves a lot of this problem. While Leo can easily counter this move, it does get her out of a lot of situations without forcing her to go fully defensive. You said, as I said, the damage raised that Nail tends to win. Jan definitely has a lot of damage, but the way she gets it is normally by playing a opponent neutral, and Nail doesn't really play.
俺との勝負で敗因を調べるのはいい。ただお前が俺でないだけの話なんだな。
レオ勝利。
分かっているぞ。戦略だな。足を上げると知った上でそのフラチなすぐに清楚なものに着替えんとしょっぴくぞ。俺が二度見するまではな。
ジャムさん、スレイヤー。シューターは練れていますか？
I have no idea what just happened. From my side, anyway. Other people appear to be spectating a match that I am not in. It looks like in the end it's Suntier that we lost. Well, he'll probably be back, bringing us back to another round of this. So let's turn it back up to full again. Which actually means maybe less, but... Part of the reason it doesn't make sense normally to charge the things they're charging in this matchup, but that Kai just doesn't stand in the spaces required. This is actually the best thing to charge in the matchup, because you can use it to get out of situations that matter less, and your opponent will tend to be susceptible to this more than anything else. It also helps Jam to build up a specific spacing against time that is hard to get otherwise. It does, however, remove that particular way of dealing with things. Should have doubled it. You can, however, overwhelm the opponent by doing nothing, or rather, by specifically giving the impression you're going to do something and then not bothering to do it. A player who is good at detecting things, at listening to things, at predicting things, can be thrown off when there's just nothing to feel.
私は金の奴隷ね。でもそれ以上に美意識の奴隷ね。たとえ相手が王様であっても、お前の顔面は NG よ。
The stressful thing about this is there really is no way around it. You can stay fully on defense, but that lets the player do certain other things. You can try to play offense, but if the player, at least they've managed to cause the situation they wanted. And you might not have wanted to play offense, maybe you're more comfortable doing something else. But technically it's sort of a requirement in these games, in the simple sense that if you didn't have this problem, it would be impossible for a player whose character only has those types of options to beat a character with strong enough defense. We saw this for a very short period in Street Fighter V, when Guile basically was able to stop nearly anything anyone ever wanted to do, except for two characters. A large portion of the cast found themselves with literally no options against Guile, other than hoping that the Guile player flash kicked at a timing that they shouldn't have. And given the properties of flash kick, it's not exactly easy to bait out while still getting a good punish. Leo's not really that strength of a character when it comes to that sort of thing, so you don't really have to worry so much about it. And this game does of course offer you running cancels, which can be timed such that they beat things Leo does if you can press it at exactly the moment Leo goes for the startup of whatever it's supposed to do. This is something we discussed in our last Street Fighter stream. Sometimes a character can have animations for their moves that are so long that certain escapes work better. Leo is definitely one of those characters. He's easy to get away from unless he commits to specifically unsafe things. Now, some people don't care, they let you go. They're willing to play that way the entire time. And some people slowly get frustrated at the fact that you get to pester them for long periods and they don't get to do anything. Whether or not you have that reaction mostly just decides whether or not you play a more offensive Leo or not though. Kai does have a way to deal with Leo having this flow. Specifically, there are things that Leo wants to do that are beaten easily by Kai's forward heavy style. Specifically, there's a specific spacing at which Kai can do the first hit of it and not do the second. And it stops nearly anything Leo might want to do. The good thing about this, it's also the spacing where max range reads several words. Leo doesn't have to let Kai get to this spot. Again, playing the fireball game will often result in him not getting to this spot. But it closes the gap so that he can only use specific projectiles. He can't use the last one. And without the last option, the projectile game is more defensive than offensive for me. Kai therefore gets to unlock the jump against the defensive Leo player, mostly by standing at a spot that he could hit a button. He never has to hit it. This is a common thing in fighting games. You never actually have to hit it. Against new players who are unaware of the properties of the attack, you do have to hit the button a couple of times so that they learn, but this often beats them, so you can learn. If Leo generally ran, this would be a different story. Looks like we're getting a little laggier than usual though, which means we may bring our stream to a close, since we have no guests today. Oh yeah, let's say we're probably not going to go as long as we intended. I may close up in a couple.
油断ならないな。回勝利。親善試合第2切磋せよ。捉えた。はい。どこを見ている。これを使うとそれは思う。
So a lot of times it's friends that it could have got piano medley. Or whatever this is. You can expect more information on these streams. It's really like we'll just end up playing Guilty Gear on Tuesday Train more often whenever we get new news about Guilty Gear Strive. Because it will remind everyone, hey, Guilty Gear, and I have opinions. And those opinions need to be told to people.
組織の長には責任が。待ちなさい。まだ話が。私は勝ったのだろうか。
That will make this our last match of the night. Tomorrow we are likely to actually see some Sandbag casuals, but I'm not going to guarantee it. Timing tends to get a little weird about that now. On Thursday we're almost certainly going to have Kame House though. And Friday, we have a Helena bot to show off. Join us next week, Monday, for another Mishmashing Battle Lounges for Friday 5. But most likely Tuesday train next week is not going to be Guilty Gear. Unless, of course, we get more news and more opinions happen. And I believe that was a sufficiently hype way to end our stream for the night. This has been really in 14 to 11K. Good luck with your training, and good night, everyone.
ジャムさん勝利。
お前食が偏りすぎ。ニンニクスープ作ってやるから待てろ。あ、なぜ逃げた？